All right, guys, good to be back with you with a little bit more. I wanted to talk about another one of these players from 1908 as I continue to work to get the Skeeterstad replay back where it needs to be. We want to talk about another player who presents a big challenge for us. So we'll go ahead here and we'll take a look at the screen. Good, it works here again. This guy is named Vin Campbell. Vin Campbell is not a nobody, all right? So you can tell that if you go down here and you look at his actual statistics. And see, I'm spoiling this here. We need to go back to his overview. He had one game, one plate appearance, one at-bat for Chicago for the Cubs in 1908, and it was in the middle of the season. But then afterwards, he winds up with the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1910, and does very well. I mean, he's got a OPS plus of 134, hits 326, hits with power, hits pretty well, considerable number of plate appearances and at bats, and did a very, very good job. And played somewhat well in 1911, and then kind of drops away, ends up with Boston, and then eventually ends up down in the Federal League. Interesting player. I was looking here at his Sabre biography, just trying to take a look and see if I could figure out what's going on. So this is one of these guys that generally if you're looking at stuff like the transaction list and Diamond Baseball, if you look at other transaction lists as well, it's going to be difficult to figure out when this guy should be on the team, right? Campbell played, we'll go ahead, actually skip straight back to this. Campbell played in 1908 in one game. He made an appearance on June 6th in this game against the Boston Doves that the Cubs won 14-0. He came in as a pinch hitter for Chick Fraser, who for some reason was taken out of the game. We're going to go check that one out in a second, see if we can figure out what's going on. So what happened before then is he was on, it appears that he was on the roster here based on this baseball reference research. He was a catcher, I believe. Let's see if we can figure this out. Yes, he was a catcher. He was the third catcher in the season behind Johnny Kling and Pat Moran. So if you look at him in Skeetersoft, he'll just have a pinch hitter rating, but he really should be a catcher. Cubs decided that he needed to develop his skills at a position other than catcher, obviously because he had two excellent catchers in front of him. So they sent him down to the 3I League after this game. It was sort of like mid to late June of 1908. So we know when he's gone. The question that we have, though, is do we know when he arrived? It appears that he was just on the club before then, right? That's a huge problem, right? Because so you've got this guy who has one appearance. This is the Husky Shaw thing again. You have a guy who has one appearance. He played in one game. He didn't get a hit, right? Didn't do anything. He had just that one plate appearance and made an out, and that's it, right? What do you do with him in your replay, right? Because if you have, let's say that you're not doing this with real life transactions. Let's say that you're playing the season out using random injuries or something like that. And, Johnny Kling winds up getting injured. Well, the Cubs need to have Vin Campbell because he would now be the backup catcher, right? You need to have him in to handle the games that Pat Moran can't handle. But you need to have him have a rating as a catcher. How do you determine what his rating should be with no Major League Baseball experience? I mean, it becomes really, really difficult for him or for you as a replayer. The other difficult thing, by the way, is that he doesn't have any major league or minor league stats before then for you to base his ability off of. I mean, that's the thing that's so hard about this, right? If we go back up through here and take a look at this, we can see that he was a football star beforehand and apparently was playing baseball either in... it looks like he was probably playing in college as well. There's actually nothing in here about whether he was playing baseball like semi-pro or not. So it's one of those things that would be difficult to look into. Kind of hard to do like the full research from this vantage point. It would take me probably several hours to go dig through this stuff. This stuff here, though, about his football prowess is really, really interesting. So it's an interesting thing sort of to talk about and to think about. In fact, I believe I actually wrote a blog post about this. Anyway, Regardless, that's the interesting thing about Campbell is trying to figure out, like, if you're going to theoretically make a rating for him, like, how do you do this? What do you come up with? How do you make this work? So let's go take a look here at that game that we talked about and see if we can get any more insight into exactly what happened. So we'll look over here again in Chicago, the Chicago Tribune, 1908. What day did we say that was? It was June 6th. So we'll look at the June 7th newspaper and take a look here and see what we got. All right, let's just take a look and see. And of course, as usual, I picked probably the wrong part of the paper to look into. Here we go. This is the right part. I have Cubs put doves to flight. There we go. And the big question that we have is why in the world was Fraser removed from the game? And they might not even tell us that. Let's see if we can figure anything else out, just out of curiosity. And yeah, I'm not seeing very much. So it's one of these sort of unusual pieces of information that you have where it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what happened and why based upon at least the very little bit I've been able to see here. So so much for that idea of looking through this and figuring out exactly why the Cubs took a pitcher out who was throwing a shutout. Anyway, but that's sort of the story behind Campbell. As you can see, like, to really figure out what's going on here, we'd probably have to take a look at different places. We'd probably have to do a little bit of digging and so on and so forth. And of course, one of the problems that we have when we look at this newspaper is that this was not a particularly interesting game. We can look here really quickly and just see if there's anything that tells us about why Fraser was taken out of the game. Yeah, it's not clear. It doesn't look like there's really much to be said there. So, you know, the mystery sort of what goes on here continues. Of course, as you know, there are other papers you can look at, and we probably would, if we really, really started to dig into this, we probably could figure out exactly what happened, or at least get like some sort of idea, a good enough idea for us to be able to put in our head when we look at the game. Now, the other thing we want to say about Vin Campbell is not only that it's kind of difficult to figure out exactly what to do with him. The other interesting thing about him, of course, is that in 1910, when he played with the Pirates, he became a star. So he was impressive in spring training. Owen Wilson twisted an ankle, and he was able to go into the game for a little while, but only played maybe a couple days. I mean, it was rough for rookies back then. But eventually it was in May, June, July, and so on. He had a lot of opportunities and then became a regular starter in early September after Fred Clark was under a lot of criticism for his declining ball. I mean, he ended up playing center field and then over and left, and the reason why is because he kept making errors. He had a fielding percentage of .895, which is pretty bad. If you're talking about WAR fielding, this is the guy really to look at. And this is an interesting thing too, by the way, because we keep thinking about like these guys who come up as catchers, catching being, you know, the most difficult of the positions and so on and so forth. Well, here you have a guy who was a catcher. I don't know how good or bad he was. None of us can know because he didn't play catcher in anything that we have statistics for. But he went over into the outfield and was just absolutely horrible, right? So, I mean, how do you deal with that? You know, where's Bill James at? What can he tell us about, you know, how in the world this guy had a fielding percentage of .895 in 1910, right? 18 errors and only 171 chances. I mean, that's pretty bad. So, anyway, there you go. It's a little bit more, though, about Vin Campbell, who definitely was a good offensive player, but at some point in time, the defense becomes too much of a liability for him. Or for anybody who wants to manage him. Interesting thing about this guy is I'm looking at this too. Most interesting thing of all is that when he came up in 1908, he was only 20 years old. Can you imagine that? I mean, he came up with the Cubs before he went to Decatur, and then ended up in Aberdeen, all the way over in Washington in 1909 as a 21-year-old, and then poof, he was over in Pittsburgh. He was done with the sport by the time he was 27 years old, which is incredible, and he was hitting over 300 at the time as well. So there you go for Vin Campbell. Pretty interesting stuff going on here. But as I said before, the biggest question that you have is, well, what do you do with this player? I mean, because the actual role that he played on the team in real life is different than the role that he's likely to play in your replay. They didn't see him as pinch hitter. They saw him as, the third string catcher. So anyway, there you have it. Talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.